Medieval manuscripts are weird. From imagery of knights fighting snails to bizarre stories of moles raining from the sky, it would be difficult to find a more unusually depicted era in history. But some of the strangest and most mysterious occurrences in these manuscripts are much more subtle. Single names of kings, events, and cities that don't exist anywhere else. And sure, kings come and go, they fade in and out of living memory, but areas, places are permanent. People continue to live in them for centuries. So when we find a handful of names relating to a kingdom whose location seems to be all over the place, whose kings appear to have ruled in different areas, and whose name isn't even spelt consistently, then it becomes very mysterious indeed. Let's explore the story of a lost kingdom in medieval Britain and see how an entire piece of history went missing. Our story starts in the 17th century. Sir John Cotton, an English baronet, donates his library of ancient manuscripts to the public. And among them is a very curious specimen, Cotton Domitian A1, the name for a composite of various different manuscripts, including a collection of papers that historians have dubbed the Annals Cambria, a chronicle which covers events in medieval Wales with some mentions of Ireland and England too. And among these events is a very mysterious entry. AD 795. King Offa lays waste to Rheinwg. That's an interesting name, and it's not one that ever occurs again in this manuscript. In fact, it's so obscure that this entry doesn't even appear in the other two versions of the Annals Cambria. We don't have many clues as to where this place was. The man mentioned, Offa, was the king of Mercia, so if he invaded this Rheinwg, then it could have conceivably been anywhere outside of Mercia, although the spelling would place it somewhere in Wales, as many Welsh kingdoms ended in a WG, but more on that later. And we know that King Offa was certainly active in Wales, as two earlier entries tell us that he raided into the country, recording attacks in 784 and specifically into South Wales in 778. However, as I said, we are given no specific information as to where this Rheinwg actually was, which tells us that this region was probably famous enough not to warrant any further explanation, making it all the more mysterious as to how we lost this location only a few centuries later. Our second and third clues come from two other manuscripts dated to the late 11th century, known as the Life of St. Padarn and the Life of St. Cadog, two biographies of two Welsh saints who were both alive in around the 5th century. In the first source, we are told that St. Padarn, along with two of his contemporaries, St. Talio and St. Dewi, divided the lands of South Wales to form three separate dioceses, in Sysylllwg, Morgannwg, and Rheinwg. There's that name again, and here we can see why Rheinwg was probably a Welsh name, as the WG ending is present in all three of these places, and it simply denoted that the land is named after a person. So in English we could call these Morgan's Land, Sysys Land, and Rain's Land. Sysylllwg is also a rare name, but the Life of St. Padarn tells us explicitly that it makes up the land of Ceredigion, an area located here, although some sources make it a bit larger. Morgannwg was much more famous, as it was named after a king, Morgan, who ruled a Welsh kingdom known as Glywysing in the 10th century, and this name still survives today. But frustratingly, Rheinwg is again not described in any detail. We can only assume that it at least covered the parish of St. David's, who supposedly took the land, but aside from that, we can only guess. Dr. Ben Guy suggests that due to this manuscript being from the 12th century, then it might have intended Rheinwg to cover what was then the Diocese of St. David's, a huge amount of land stretching all across South Wales, which fits in geographically with the other two names, but again we don't have any proper mention of Rheinwg's territory, but at least this narrows us down a bit to probably somewhere in South Wales. Our third clue also gives us our first discernible fact, that Rheinwg was evidently a kingdom, as we have references to several kings of Rheinwg, so if we can identify these leaders, then we might be able to narrow down its location. The first king we have is again found in the Life of St. Cadog, where we are introduced to a certain Meredydd, king of Rheinwg. By the time this biography was written, there had already been 4 kings named Meredydd, all of which were located in this area, known as the Kingdom of Dyfed. Now, as we've seen, Rheinwg was probably somewhere in South Wales, likely covering at least the parish of St. David's, and now we're told one of its kings was from Dyfed, a kingdom that fits all of these criteria. But you might have noticed that I said our first king was from Dyfed, as the Life of St. Cadog names 2 other kings, one named Cynan and another named Rain, who both separately led an invasion of Morgannwg from Rheinwg in around the year 500. If they invaded Morgannwg, then Dyfed could still be a strong contender for the lost location, as the two kingdoms bordered each other. The problem though is that we only have one King Cynan in around the year 500, and that would be Cynan, king of Powys, a kingdom all the way to the north here. Great. And this so-called reign of Rheinwg isn't much help either, as the only reign we have in this time period is the king of Rheinwg, located over here. So despite Dyfed seeming like a good candidate, only one of the 3 kings of Rheinwg actually seems to have come from this region. Cynan, the outermost king, does have a saving grace though. We're told he conquered Rheinwg during his rule. So was St. Cadog simply naming him after an area that he had taken? It's a possibility. But then why would he also name Meredydd as the king of Rheinwg? So for now we have at least 2 candidates for the lost location of Rheinwg, Dyfed and Rheinwg. Both of these kingdoms are in South Wales, and Offa could have conceivably raided either of them, although Rheinwg would have been much closer. Dyfed includes the land of St. David's, who we're told took the lands of Rheinwg for his diocese, but only one of the 3 kings of Rheinwg is actually from here. Rheinwg, meanwhile, has 2 of the kings, and if you recall from the start of this video, the author of the Life of St. Cadog may have used Rheinwg to refer to the medieval diocese of St. David's, which did include this area, but if just Rheinwg was known as Rheinwg, would they have used this name to cover the entire region? This discrepancy seems to have gone unnoticed by more contemporary historians and writers though, as even by the 12th century, only 100 years after these saints' lives were written, the location of Rheinwg seems to have already begun to have been forgotten. Walter Map, an English courtier, wrote a fictional story set in the kingdom of Rheinwg at this time, and he would refer to this as the land of Rheinos. This location was also supported by the 16th century poet Lewis ab Edward and the 19th century historian Aneurin Owen, both of which claimed that Rheinwg was named after King Rhain, who was that reign of Rheinwg that I mentioned earlier, although only Lewis would provide a description, believing the land to have encompassed the regions of Rheinwg, Rhymgwy a Havren, and Buest. Aneurin's work, a translation of the medieval Welsh laws, would provide some valuable insight though, as it contains a passage describing how the kingdoms of South Wales, namely Rheinwg, Morgannwg and Sysellwg, sent representatives to elect a High King of Wales. Which is interesting, as this is the exact same trio of names that we found in the Life of St. Cadog, the first clue that we examined, although unfortunately all that this tells us is that Rheinwg was somewhere in South Wales. While the location of Rheinwg may have begun to have been forgotten by the 12th century, by the 1500s the location would be entirely lost. We can see that in the book Britannia by the historian William Camden, which contained a whole paragraph dedicated to figuring out exactly where Rheinwg was. He believed that this kingdom was centered around the city of Caer Rhain, which he thought was a location just outside of Hereford, a Roman city known as Arraconium. His conclusion was that this entire area, known in English as Archenfield, was the lost kingdom of Rheinwg, due to the fact that the Welsh names sound a bit similar. And he also believed this Caer Rhain was named after King Rhain of Rheinwg. This shaky conclusion was fairly popular at the time, and the Welsh cartographer Humphrey Llywyd even used this information to help formulate his map of Wales. He wrote that this region of Herefordshire beyond the Wye was known as Rheinwg in Welsh, and we can even see it here, Rheinwg, just south of Hereford, and the only map to ever show it by name. Despite this, as we've already seen, the location is disputed. Modern historians have generally disregarded Herefordshire. Even though a city here might bear King Rhain's name, it doesn't fulfill any of the other requirements. Which leaves us with one final piece of the puzzle, and it's this final piece that can give us our best clue. We've seen what Rheinwg is, we can theorize roughly where it might have been, but who exactly is it named after? Who is this King Rhain, and could he tell us where Rheinwg might have been? If we look at the Welsh genealogies, we run into some good and bad news. The good news is that we have 3 King Rhains. Perfect, right? It must be one of these. Unfortunately, 2 are from Dyfed and 1 is from Rheinwg, just like the other 3 kings, which doesn't narrow it down at all. The most recent of the reigns ruled from 796 till 808, and there isn't really anything remarkable about him. He ruled over Dyfed, which fills in some of our requirements, but he has no connection to Rheinwg. Speaking of which, this kingdom also has a King Rhain. If you remember, he's the one that city near Hereford might be named after. He was a lot older, ruling sometime in the 5th century, and according to one of the Peniarth manuscripts, he ruled over a big chunk of mid-Wales, known as Rheinwg, Rhymgwy a Havren, and Buest. It is not unreasonable that this land could have been named after him. This kingdom was on the border with Mercia, so Offa could have invaded it in 795, and 2 of the named kings of Rheinwg evidently controlled these lands. But it doesn't include the parish of St. David's, so why would the biography of St. Padon associate the name with this area? And why would the biography of St. Cadog name one of the kings of Dyfed as a king of Rheinwg if it was located in Rheinwg? Our last king Rhain is once again from Dyfed. He ruled a bit later, sometime in the 8th century, but once again we just encounter the same problems. Yes, he ruled the parish of St. David's, and one of the kings of Rheinwg was definitely from here, but 2 of them were not. However, there is something very interesting about this King Rhain. He was bordered to the north by the kingdom of Ceredigion, who at this time was ruled by a man named Saesyll, like Saesyllug, but the life of St. Padon called Ceredigion, bordering somewhere called Rheinwg. Based on these similarities, some historians have theorized that the name Rheinwg has its origins around here, although unfortunately the only information we have to go off is from folklore. In the Mabinogion, a collection of medieval Welsh myths, a king of Dyfed is said to have ruled over the region of Saesyllug, which included Ceredigion and this region known as Ystrad Tywi. And since we have evidence that Ystrad Tywi was a part of Dyfed, some historians have theorized that perhaps King Saesyll of Ceredigion conquered this region from Dyfed, resulting in this enlarged kingdom being renamed as Saesyllug in his honor, and this shrunken Dyfed being named as Rheinwg in some sort of medieval equivalent of a roast. Can you see the problem though? This has nothing to do with Rheinwg. Perhaps it's possible that there are 2 Rheinwgs, and if every clue we have just ends up being split between Dyfed and Rheinwg, maybe they're just 2 separate entities. If only we had something that would bring these 2 kingdoms together. Oh wait, what's this? If we take a look at the list of the kings of Dyfed and compare it to the list of the kings of Rheinwg, something very weird comes up. 3 of the names are the exact same, and by the looks of things, sometime around the 7th century, the king of Rheinwg died without a son, allowing the husband of his daughter, the king of Dyfed, to come in and take the throne. We're told that the next 3 kings of Dyfed also became the next 3 kings of Rheinwg, and their names were Cathen, Cadugon, and Rhain. Rhain ap Cadugon, the king of Dyfed, home to the parish of St. David's and one of the 3 kings of Rheinwg, also ruled Rheinwg, the land bordering Mercia, which was home to the final 2 kings of Rheinwg. And all of this is wrapped under a kingdom that bears his name, Rheinwg, Rhain's land. So maybe, just maybe, this kingdom wasn't actually a kingdom at all, but a geographical term, used to refer to the combined lands of Dyfed and Rheinwg. That would match the description of St. David's parish by St. Padon, and all 3 of the named kings of Rheinwg would be from this area. And just like what we saw in the Welsh laws and the life of St. Padon, combining this term Rheinwg with Saesyllug and Morgannwg covers the whole of South Wales, and makes a nice matching trio of names as well. This theory is supported by modern historians such as Ben Guy and Peter Bartram, and although the idea of Rheinwg being named after a shrunken Dyfed still comes up, this hypothesis is the only one to actually cover all of the criteria of this missing medieval kingdom. So it looks like for now that we may have solved this mystery, but who knows, maybe someday we'll discover an ancient reference to a long-lost king Rheinwg in the middle of Great Britain. I'll have to start this whole process all over again. Thanks for watching.